It's a lot of pressure being a second-generation wrestler. The weight of expectation can often weigh heavy on a lot of people's shoulders, and for every Charlotte Flair or Bret Hart, there are just as many David Flairs or Bruce Harts that never quite managed to make the cut. Brian James, however, would prove to be a great success story as one of the greatest mic workers of his era, with this ultimately being what helped him to carve out a spot for himself in arguably the most talent-heavy roster of all time, creating a legacy in the process that still carries him on to this day. Yes, from his time spent in Smokey Mountain Wrestling to his days working alongside Jeff Jarrett, all the way through his work with DX and beyond, Brian James has had one hell of a run. But how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey in Oh, you didn't know? The Road Dogg Story. Brian Gerard James was born on May 20th, 1969 in Marietta, Georgia into a wrestling family that included his brothers Scott, Brad, and Steve, and of course his father, the legendary territory figure Bullet Bob Armstrong. So with this pedigree behind him then, it only made sense that the youngster would want to get involved in the industry himself, something he started doing after leaving school in 1986, as it was then that, after months of training with his old man, he would step into the ring for the first time for NWA Southeast Championship Wrestling to take on and ultimately defeat Kevin Sullivan. And with a victory over a big name in his debut then, it seemed like the promotion had plans for Brian going forward. Unfortunately, this would be put on hold for the next few years though, as before he devoted himself to wrestling full-time, he decided he wanted to achieve another ambition by enlisting in the United States Marine Corps, there acting as a platoon sergeant in charge of 33 Marines and taking part in Operation Desert Storm in 1991. Once this tour was over later that year though, Brian would return stateside where he would pick up right where he left off with his wrestling career, following his brother Brad over to World Championship Wrestling then, and taking part in his first match in 5 years on July 7th, 1991, losing to Terry Taylor as part of the Great American Bash House Show Tour. And once that was done, he would serve another short term in the military heading into the autumn, with this ultimately lasting until November of 1992, at which point he began working for Smokey Mountain Wrestling under the masked gimmick of the Dark Secret. Despite his family lineage though, this role would see him primarily act as a jobber, often losing to more established talent such as Tracy Smothers. And part of the reason for this was that, with his military career still active and his next tour of duty coming up, promoters felt they couldn't really push the youngster to the next level until they had his full attention. Luckily for them then, after one more term in the Marines early in 1993, Brian would return to SMW in July of that year, now ready to leave the military life behind and devote himself to wrestling fully. So, with that decision set, the Southern promotion gave him the new ring name of Brian Armstrong and began building him up with a win streak as, over the next few months, he would rack up victories over a number of jobbers. And this would all eventually lead to him getting another shot with WCW on November 30th when he was brought in as an opponent for a young Steve Austin, losing to the future Rattlesnake there, but impressing bosses enough for them to bring him back more in 1994. Yes, this was the year that would see Brian finally look to break out as he got to face off against the likes of Terra Rising, a pre-WWE Triple H, and Lord Steven Regal, with the latter match actually being for the WCW Television Championship. And as if that wasn't enough, he would also get to work as part of a semi-regular tag team with his brother Brad around this time. That said, for as much spotlight as he was being given, Brian would more often than not come out on the losing end during these bouts as, while his family pedigree was undeniable, the general feeling was that his siblings simply outmatched him when it came to in-ring skill. What they couldn't match him in though was his verbal skills, and so, when he finally got a chance to let these shine, he would break out to the next level at last. Sadly though, this wouldn't happen in WCW. No, it wouldn't be until he left in November of 1994, in fact, that the true star power of the Georgia boy would become apparent for all to see. Yes, it was then that Brian would sign a contract with WWE, there being rebranded as the Roadie, a heel personal assistant to would-be country singer Jeff Jarrett. And while Jarrett would occasionally throw the Roadie into the ring on his behalf during this time, his primary role would be to serve as the real, uncredited singer of his alleged hit song, With My Baby Tonight. Of course, fans weren't supposed to know that Double J wasn't really the voice behind the song at first though, and the eventual reveal of this was planned to see the roadie turn babyface, with this sparking a feud between the two. Before that could happen though, both men would abruptly leave the company following a contract dispute after In Your House 2 on July 23, 1995, with the two from there moving over to the United States Wrestling Association together and continuing on their act there as the roadie altered his ring name once more to Jesse James Armstrong. And while with USWA, Jesse would find much success in his own right, winning at various points the promotion's heavyweight, television, and tag team titles. Ultimately though, his time there would be short-lived as, after reopening the lines of communication with Vince McMahon in 1996, he would be brought back to WWE, where he would continue on with his previous storyline by labeling himself as Jesse James, the real Double J and true singer of With My Baby Tonight. And now, finally getting a chance to shine on the microphone, Jesse would soon enter into a feud with the Honky Tonk Man after repeatedly denying his attempts to become his new manager. Seeking revenge then, the Hogan-era heel picked up a new lackey in the form of Rockabilly, who he would regularly send after the real Double J in the weeks that followed. In the end though, after being in the ring together a few times, both Jesse James and Rockabilly realized that they were stronger together, and so that was how, after the latter had abandoned the Honky Tonk Man in late 1997, the two would formally begin their own union, with them there changing their names to the Road Dogg Jesse James and Badass Billy Gunn, the New Age Outlaws! And almost instantly then, the Outlaws would become one of the hottest acts in the company, as their bratty, juvenile antics fit right in with the shock jock humor of the late 90s and perfectly represented the direction the company was moving in. And of course, looking to solidify this position within this landscape, the duo would set their sights on establishing themselves as the top tag team of the future by going after the top tag team of the past, the Legion of Doom. And while Hawk and Animal would put up a hell of a fight throughout this feud, in the end it would be the Outlaws who got the better of them, defeating them to start their first run with the WWE Tag Team titles that winter. Following this, and the heels would move on to a program with Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie, one which memorably led to altogether new levels of violence when Road Dogg and Billy Gunn threw their opponents into a dumpster and rolled them off the stage at the entranceway, legitimately injuring Funk in the process. Soon after that, and they would formally join D-Generation X after months of having teased an alliance with the stable, something which would see them reach the next level again as, now part of the hottest babyface group in WWE, they became star attractions of Raw every week, often getting amongst the loudest crowd reactions as Road Dogg conducted fans to chant along with his now famous ring intro. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, D-Generation X proudly brings to you its WWE Tag Team Champions of the World, the Road Dogg Jesse James, the Badass Billy Gunn, the New Age Outlaws! Yes, during this period, the Outlaws would dominate the tag team division so much that they held the tag titles on no less than 5 separate occasions. So successful were they, in fact, that at a certain point in early 1999, after deciding that they'd achieved just about everything they could in the tag division, they branched off into singles runs for a while, as the Georgia native became both a hardcore and intercontinental champion. Come the turn of the century, though, things started to shift when, in a moment that was surely a rib from someone higher up, the Road Dogg would have one of the more infamous Royal Rumble performances in memory when he was forced to spend a full 19 minutes in the ring on January 23, 2000. And despite a bout of food poisoning hitting him prior to the match and forcing him to spend the majority of his time hugging the bottom rope for dear life, hoping that he could hold his bowels until he got backstage once again. And well, luckily he would manage to do this. From there, things continued to shift in a downward direction when, after briefly coming back together with his tag partner for a while, by February 2000, an injury suffered by Billy Gunn would put him out of action for the foreseeable future, with this leading to Road Dogg forming a regular tag team with fellow DX stablemate X-Pac instead. Never able to replicate the success of the Outlaws, though, this union would eventually fritter away as time went on and DX disbanded entirely. So, looking for someone new to team up with following this, the former degenerate would find a perfect ally in K-Quick as, with both having great verbal skills and killings more than able to carry himself in the ring, they officially joined forces in late 2000, with this union being most memorable now for the two rapping their own theme song, Get Rowdy, every time they hit the entrance ramp. Sadly, this team wouldn't last for long though, because by this point, Road Dogg's substance abuse issues, which he'd been struggling with for some time, had gotten so out of control that WWE were forced to release him from his contract in January of 2001, with them fearing that if they let him continue on as he was going to end up hurting himself or someone else. After his release then, Bryan would show up at the March 26, 2001 episode of Nitro, hoping to get a job with WCW, not knowing at the time that this would be the very night where Shane McMahon appeared in front of the Southern wrestling crowd to announce that the McMahon family had purchased the company and would be running things going forward. So with WCW no longer being an option now either, the Georgia Boy moved over to the independent circuit, where he began appearing at local shows around the country. Unfortunately though, his drug problems continued to get the better of him at this point, and so, when he wasn't no-showing events altogether, he was often getting himself into trouble for being publicly intoxicated, at one point even getting arrested for disorderly conduct at a show in South Carolina in May of that year. Realizing that he had to do something to try and get his life back on track then, Bryan would make various attempts at entering rehab over the next few years, finding work once more during one of these clean periods when he ended up signing for Total Nonstop Action Wrestling in September of 2002. And it was there that he would rename himself BG James, working as a heel and becoming one of the founding members of Vince Russo's Sports Entertainment Extreme faction. That alignment would only be fleeting, however, as, come 2003, James would have formed a new stable with Conan and his old friend K-Quick, the latter now going by his real name of Ron Killings, as the three became known as the 3 Live Crew. And as a unit, the trio would find much success over the next couple of years as they each held the NWA World Tag Team titles together on 2 separate occasions under Freebird rules, all while elsewhere, James and Conan were helping their teammate to become the NWA World Heavyweight Champion for the second time. That said, things wouldn't remain perfect forever, as when Billy Gunn came to TNA in 2005, he would repeatedly try to restart his old team with James, something which caused much tension between the other 2 3 Live Crew members who, at the time, felt like they were being usurped. And despite initially struggling over which side to remain loyal to, in the end, the Georgia Boy decided he was better off with Killings and Conan for the time being. Not that this stopped Gunn from continuing to seek his friendship once more though, as, over the next few weeks, he would eventually save his old teammate from attacks at the hands of Team Canada, with this eventually being enough to see James invite him into the fold, this making the group the 4 Live Crew going forward. Ultimately, this would be short-lived too, however, as after Conan and Killings moved away from the stables in the months that followed, BG and Kip, as Billy Gunn was then calling himself, became a 2-man unit once more, initially calling themselves the James Gang and then later rebranding themselves again as the Voodoo Kin Mafia, a thinly veiled reference to their old boss, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. Following this rebranding, the duo would get involved in a feud with Conan's new stable, LAX, heading into 2006, with this eventually seeing James' father, Bullet Bob Armstrong, being brought into the fold as he helped to even the odds. And with this extra help pushing them forward then, BG and Kip ended up winning the program, moving on from there into a series with Team 3D that saw all 4 men argue over who had been the best team across each of their lengthy and illustrious histories. And all these arguments would eventually be settled when the time for their final showdown came at the August 15th episode of Impact, where it would be the ECW Originals who came out on top, with this leading to the former New Age Outlaws spiraling and threatening to kayfabe quit TNA altogether not long after in a worked shoot segment. And while few believed they were going anywhere, this angle ultimately did its job in building up their eventual return to action on the November 16th episode of Impact, at which point they began calling out their former DX stablemates, Triple H and Shawn Michaels, using the latter's real name as they infamously challenged Hickenbottom to meet them at the Alamo. But of course, neither the game nor HBK would respond to these challenges, and so, quickly scrapping the whole thing then, the Voodoo Kin Mafia next attempted to move on to a feud with the Hardy Boys when they accepted their open challenge for the WWE ECW December to Dismember show in late 2006. Needless to say though, this match wouldn't come to pass either, as there was no way Vince McMahon was letting either man anywhere near one of his shows at that point in time. Claiming victory then, the VKM would state that WWE was too scared to face them during an interview segment at January 14, 2007's Final Resolution pay-per-view. And with this moral win now secured, at least in their minds, James would work some additional indie dates over the course of the rest of the year, showing up at places like the Millennium Wrestling Federation and giving fans there a nice surprise. That said, all wasn't well behind the scenes, as his drug issues would return to the forefront around this time too, with this leading to him no-showing a benefit event for superstar Billy Graham, then following that up by going on a hate-filled rant towards Jim Ross at a question-and-answer session. And these issues would also see him spend less and less time on TNA television too as it happened, with his only other real notable moment during 2007 being his victory in a Feast or Fired match that earned him a World Tag Team title shot at a time and place of his choosing. And while many expected him to team with Kip James during this eventual title shot, BG would end up swerving everyone when he instead chose his father as his partner, with this angering the former Billy Gunn so much that he would end up turning on the former Outlaw during the February 21, 2008 episode of Impact, laying him out with a crutch and severing the team from there. So, seeking revenge then, BG would face off against his now former partner in a 6 Sides of Steel match at April 13th's Lockdown pay-per-view, defeating him there to finally put things to bed as, after that, he would go on a hiatus from TV, only returning in December to take part in the Feast or Fired match at Final Resolution. And after that, his appearances would remain sporadic, with his last televised showing happening on January 8, 2009, as come that September, he would be released from his contract. But while it's unclear why he was released at this time, given his ongoing addiction issues, it's easy to put 2 and 2 together. Regardless of what the reason was though, the reality was that Bryan would now once again return to the indie circuit where he would go under the Jesse James moniker, popping up here and there over the next couple of years, and even at one point having a brief reunion with Billy Gunn in the Canadian Wrestling Elite promotion. Luckily though, by 2011, he seemed to have finally got his demons in check, and that was partially why, seeing the improvements he'd made, WWE came calling once more to have the former Road Dogg appear at that year's Hall of Fame ceremony so as to induct his father, Bullet Bob Armstrong. And with this opening up the lines of communication again then, it didn't take long after this before Bryan would be re-signed in a backstage producer role, with him there helping to lay out matches behind the scenes, all while, on screen, he would get to make his return to WWE TV for the first time in a decade when he had a cameo appearance in the 2012 Royal Rumble match. Following this, he continued to make sporadic on-screen appearances, reuniting with his old DX stablemates on Raw 1000, and even getting to host some WWE.com exclusive shows with Josh Matthews around the same time. That said, it wouldn't be until March 4, 2013 that the long-awaited New Age Outlaws return to in-ring action would take place, as it was then that they would team up once more to take on Primo and Epico on an episode of Raw. And realizing they still had something left in the tank at this point then, the Outlaws would continue on for a while in a nostalgia run that saw them take on the likes of the Rhodes Brothers and The Shield, with the former team being who they would defeat to have one more reign as the tag team champions, and the latter being who they would feud with for the first part of 2014, eventually putting them over strong at WrestleMania 30. Following that, and Bryan would resume his role as a backstage producer once more. Of course, he would still return to the ring to team with Billy Gunn on occasion, such as the time when the two faced off against the Ascension at the 2015 Royal Rumble, or the time when he took part in the DX vs NWO spectacle of Triple H vs Sting at WrestleMania 31. But by then, these were little more than fleeting moments as, with him entering his mid-40s, he'd realized that it was time to start focusing on things that wouldn't destroy his body any more than he already had done by then. So with this in mind then, he must have been happy when, in December of 2016, he began working as a member of the SmackDown writing team, with McMahon being so impressed with his work here that he would eventually promote him to the role of head writer for the Blue brand overall. And while fan reception to his work during this time would be mixed, his bosses must have remained happy with what he was doing, as the Georgia Boy would remain in this role for the next 3 years, only losing the position after he resigned following WrestleMania 35. And while it's not fully clear why he quit, the belief is that Bryan had grown frustrated with trying to play to the creative whims of the increasingly erratic Vince McMahon, with him also allegedly being sick of having to act as the public fall guy for the quality of the show at this point. Still, he would stay with the company regardless, as he shifted over to a job in the WWE Performance Center where he would work directly under Triple H instead, there helping to train new recruits in the art of promos and character development. And as it happened, 2019 would also be the year where he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame as part of DX, with all the work he'd done in the late 90s and early 2000s finally being recognized here. But does that mean it's the end of the line for the Road Dogg? Well, if we're talking in the ring, then probably. Of course, there's always the chance he'll make a few more cameo appearances as the years progress, but it seems like, by and large, he's happy in the role he's in now, helping to prepare the next generation to do just what he was able to do at the turn of the century, and that's leave a mark that will never be forgotten as one of the true outlaws of his era. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.